So for those that are viewing that are not here, and for everybody that is here, it's really my pleasure and honor to introduce John Graham. So John is the author of Sit Down, Young Stranger. John, this is actually your second dialogue.
I think so.
We talked a lot about your experiences last time, but it was actually upon reading Larry Dossey's book, One Mind, and I just got to interview Larry, that I was midway through reading the book and happened to read a chapter that started talking about the adventures of a young John Graham, who I said, I know that. That's you. You went through that? And so it intrigued me enough to say, John, I'd like to talk to you about, we're having these transformational dialogues on unique experiences, and it seemed that you went through one, and I don't want to give that away. But perhaps, what would you like to say relevant? You've led such a life that we could talk about your history forever. So I'm going to let you just edit it to what parts you think are relevant as far as background for tonight.
Right.
And then we're going to just take it from there.
Right. Well, first of all, Craig doesn't know this, but I have changed the agenda for this evening. This nation's politics are so incomprehensible that there's been a switch. President Obama is going to speak on mysticism to the nation tonight, and I will give you the State of the Union address.
That I would like to see.
Well, you know, actually, when Craig told me he was doing this series, to be honest with you, I actually approached him and said, I would like to be part of it, talk about mysticism. Now, Craig knows me pretty well. And there was a silence on the other end of the phone. And finally, there was a sort of semi-polite, huh? Because Craig knew that I'm a pretty secular guy. And I can't get my fill of red meat, and I wouldn't be caught dead in a tie-dye shirt. So the whole idea of me talking about this subject seems a little strange. But he got with it. He trusts me, I guess. And then I got to thinking about it, and I think I convinced him that who better to talk about mysticism than someone like me, who I guess doesn't seem to look the part. But anyway, here's where the backstory goes. I'm going to spend some moments on the backstory, and
As a chiropractor, I know
that. Right. Growing up as a young man, the only thing that was important to me was adventure, and the more dangerous the adventures, the better. I started off by going to sea when I was 17 years old. After my sophomore year in college, I hitchhiked through Algeria at the end of the colonial war there, and rebel bands would stop cars going in my direction at gunpoint and tell the driver to take me on, and I just thought this was just wonderful. And then after my junior year, I and a bunch of other people from college decided we would climb the north face of the then unclimbed north face of Mount McKinley in Alaska. This was a climb that is so difficult and so dangerous that we made the first ascent, but it's never even been tried afterward because of the extreme dangers of this climb. But I was indestructible. We all were indestructible, and after all the adventures I had up to that point, I had a lot of things that had been dangerous, and I'd walked away from all of them. So why would Mount McKinley be any different? And sure enough, low down on the mountain, I was caught in the middle of an avalanche, a rock fall. Large rocks the size of basketballs are falling down the 2 miles down the side of this horrendous mountain, and I couldn't run. There was no place to run. I was caught, and this whole mass of rocks was heading straight for me. I just stood there, and every one of them missed. It's like a Roadrunner cartoon or something, where and I could even see the striations of the individual rocks as they all but parted my hair. I thought, okay, fine. Well, I was 22 years old, so we just picked up and headed on, climbed the mountain. There were other incidents too, but the biggest one was on coming back from the mountain. We had climbed it, come back around. We'd made the first ascent of this horribly dangerous face, and now we had to go 3 miles out through the bush, crossing wild rivers to get back to our car. So we get almost the way back there. We have to ford the McKinley River. That year it's in 11 braids. And we crossed 10 of them. We shouldn't have even tried, because a river like the McKinley River, it ebbs and flows depending on when the sun hits the mountain. So the water goes up and down, but the water was high when we got there. But heck, I mean, we had just spent 38 days. We were climbing this mountain. We were 22 years old. We had just won a bet for free steak dinners if we could get back to the McKinley Park Hotel. So we decided to cross this river. We started across, got across 10 braids. Hank and I are tied together. We go across for the 11th braid, and I somehow slip. I fall in a hole everyone else has missed, and I get flung down into the river, heading out to sea, and I'm hit by head on the rocks at the bottom of the river. I get knocked out, but the water's so cold I get revived. But now imagine the physics of it. Hank, my partner, is on a rope. He's already on the far bank, and I'm being shoved down this massive roaring river, and I'm pulling Hank. So the question is, will I pull him into the river and we both drown, or will I hit the bank? And I'm saying, well, obviously the latter happened. He hit the bank. I'm sitting there, bruised and half dead, and my buddies come and pull me out. And I get to thinking then, sort of laying there on the gravel bar, why me? Why do I keep doing all these dangerous things and I keep walking away from them? Is there a quid pro quo? I didn't really believe in God that much, but was there something up there that was saying, okay, I'll keep saving your life, you idiot, but there's something you got to do for the rest of your life? And I didn't know what it was, so I sort of put that in the back of my head. But it never really went away. But the adventures continued. After college, I hitchhiked around the world, working as a war correspondent for the Boston Globe. Hitchhiking around the world, going through every war on my path that I could find. After that, I joined the U.S. Foreign Service as a way of keeping my scheme of adventures going, and the Foreign Service didn't disappoint. I had a very exciting career. I was in the middle of the first revolution in Libya, for example, when Muammar Gaddafi came to power. Not when he left, but when he came to power. And then after that was a year and a half in Vietnam. And I told the State Department to send me to the most difficult and dangerous spot, and they sure enough did. I was stationed as the political advisor in Hue, right up against the DMZ, and for a year and a half, every day could have been my last. It was very dangerous. There was a lot of violence. I won't go into a lot of these stories in any detail. But I got hooked, and it wasn't just on adventure, because now that I was doing all this stuff for the State Department and living through it all, they thought I was terrific. I was their fair-haired boy, so I got promoted rapidly up the State Department's ranks. So it wasn't just adventure then that was my adrenaline, my drug of choice. It was power, adventure and power. But in Vietnam, that began to shift a little bit. I had done and seen some things in Vietnam that are still very hard to talk about today. And I came back confused. State Department sent me to Stanford for a year to get a master's degree as a reward for not getting my head blown off in Vietnam. And the confusion only mounted. My life began to fall apart. Got sent back to Washington, D.C., and my then first wife heard a radio ad for a lecture. No, it wasn't a lecture. Yeah, a lecture on mysticism given at a Holiday Inn by a Puerto Rican guru whom no one had ever heard of, who had something called the Inner Peace Movement, as I remember. So she and I go to this Holiday Inn room.
Actually, I'm just going to pause you for a second. Yeah. When we do EFT trainings, we often talk about what we call the trauma pull, like when people have been through pretty intense things, they fly through the story. And I feel like I'm being pulled through the river through the first part of the story, and we need to pause for a second. Leading up to the mysticism, I just kind of want to take a deep breath and let everybody, because even though you've told that story a lot, that's an amazing amount to have lived through. I mean, beyond amazing. From Nam to Pre to the, I mean, it just is a lot. So before we get on to the mystical part, here you are going through, you're the war correspondent, you're the State Department boy, you're just like going through.
Yeah.
Now, why did, at that point, did you think that there was, you know, what I would assume on the Enneagram is a 7 personality, that having to go through and that adrenaline junkie activity, really going for the peak? Why? What was driving that in you that you were aware of at that time, do you think?
I wasn't aware at that time.
Okay.
It took a lot of, I mean, who is? I was, I suppose, I mean, if you want to get, and I don't want to, I certainly don't want to spend this evening in the early psychoanalysis, but, you know, I was how many in this room were classic nerds as young people? Yeah, well, that's what it was about, I think. I mean, I just got, when I was a senior in high school, I was my present height and weighed 150 pounds. And believe me, I didn't dare go on the beach for all the sand that would be kicked on me. So, you know, it was like I was bullied, and yet I was really smart, so I go to Harvard and all that kind of stuff. But I never forgave the bullies, and I would have given anything to throw one touchdown pass, and I was so uncoordinated. I grew 6 inches in 6 months once. I was so uncoordinated that I could hardly walk up and down stairs, let alone throw a football pass or do anything athletic. And needless to say, with a face full of pimples, would girls look at me? No. So, you know, it was like that was the stage. And I'm sure that you know, that anger is still never really entirely disappeared. I still went to my 50th high school reunion. I still couldn't stand those sons of bitches. Still 50 years later.
But when we get to the mystical part, I'm trying to like...
right.
Trying to put some pieces together. I'm
trying to say, the reason you wanted me to give this lecture is that I'm a pretty secular guy with a lot of scar tissue, so who better than for me to, you know, hey, look, how many of you would be here if I came here in a white cloak, no, so that's not what you're going to get. So anyway, that's the beginning of an answer.
And I like that just because I think people always have, I think often people have pictures for why me, why that person, did they deserve that? Were they living a life of devotion? Were they living a life of not devotion? Were they, right, all of that. So I'm not trying to psychoanalyze, but I'm trying to get like a pre-experience picture.
Well, that's as close as now, with a lot of, I'm 71 now, so with a lot of hindsight, I think that's probably where it was coming from. But the biggest question at the time there, the one that consumed me, was the one down on the McKinley River. Why me? Why me? Because by then, I don't know, I had come close. I don't mean that close. I mean that close to a violent death a dozen times. It was mostly mountain climbing, but then when I got on the Foreign Service, it was bullets whistling by my ear. I walked away from all of it. I kept walking away from all of it, just doing these, what some are regarded as damn fool things. So, you know, there's this moment of getting caught up in all that, being indestructible, then being powerful, and having all the State Department think that I'm just wonderful, and think, hell, I'm going to be Secretary of State if I play my cards right. So all that gets caught up, but at the same time, I was in the middle of the developing world, the third world, a lot. So what I saw was a whole lot of violence and a whole lot of poverty. Some of the violence I was directly involved in. And I kid people that I never wore striped pants in my life. I never worked at an embassy in Europe. And the embassies I worked in were all jungles and deserts. And then most of the people who are now my friends were picketing people like me in the 60s, the 70s. But that's who it was. I mean, that's what I was doing. And it was great fun. It was a tremendous source of adrenaline. I was getting more and more powerful. I said, hey, life is great. But looking at all that suffering, and looking at being part of all that violence began to gnaw at me. So by the time I got to California after Vietnam, I didn't know one end up from the other. I had no real spiritual life. My Catholicism had disappeared the first year at Harvard. So I was sitting there saying, what is going on? Because I think everything is going right, but it's not going right. Something missing.
Which part wasn't going right? On one hand, you'd survived. You'd been doing everything you wanted to do. So what wasn't going right?
What was not going right was that I had no spiritual life. I began to see all this suffering and realizing I was part of it. I had a moral sense buried there someplace, but it wasn't evident. And so I was just pretty confused. And the fact that I was so competent only increased the confusion because I kept getting promoted for doing all these things. So we're back in Washington, D.C., and my first wife hears this lecture, the Inner Peace Movement. We go to this lecture, and here's this fat Puerto Rican in a bowling shirt. His name is Francisco. Yeah, his name is Francisco. And what he does is he gives a lecture on transcendentalism. In other words, direct contact with God or the higher power, whatever you want to call it. So I like that because I didn't like the idea of having to go to a priest or a rabbi or a guru. I like the idea of what he said, that you could talk to God yourself. I thought it was great. And afterward, he gave a demonstration. There was a woman, one of his lieutenants, who went into a trance, or so it seemed. She could have been a good actress, but she went into a trance, and an entity came into the room and spoke good stuff, but nothing a flesh and blood preacher wouldn't say on Sunday. So my first wife and I drive away from this lecture, and I sort of dismiss it, saying, interesting. And a few hours later, about 2 in the morning, I have this tremendous nightmare, and I'm convinced the house is on fire. I wake up, and the house, so I think, is full of smoke. So I wake up my wife, wake up the kids, and they look at me as if I'm crazy, because there is no fire and there is no smoke. Next night, same thing, only this time I can't open my eyes. I can't open my eyes. Finally, I have to pry open my eyelids before I can see the smoke and see that the house is on fire, but it's not on fire. Third night, same thing. I'm going crazy. I have no idea what the hell is going on. I'm a Harvard, Stanford trained academic person, and this wild stuff is going on, and I can't explain it. All I know is that it happened right after this lecture by this fat Puerto Rican in a bowling shirt. So I call up one of his lieutenants, and she says, nightmares, huh? She says, yeah, that happens a lot. She says, sometimes people who are really psychic and have no idea that they are really psychic get caught in this stuff because they have no idea what's going on. And they're wide open to some of this. You better come over here because we're starting a class in meditation and you probably would profit from it. So I started going to this class in meditation in Rockville, Maryland. And I mean, meditation? Why on earth would you want to turn off your mind? That's crazy. That's where I was in terms of meditation. Gee. So I struggle through it because the opposite is more of these nightmares. And sure enough, I go a couple times and the nightmares start diminishing and I actually begin to see some merit in meditation. And after about two months, she turns to me, it's a group of about 6, 7 people, she turns to me and says, okay, John, I'd like you to meditate, but go as deep as you can. Go as deep as you can. So I do. And I start dropping into a deeper and deeper meditative state. And then all of a sudden I realize that I'm heading down a steep path toward a cliff, and I can't get back. I can't get back to the waking state. So I go faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. Then I go off the cliff. And then I'm falling. And the wind's ripping my clothes off. And I'm falling this endless distance. And all of a sudden, boom, I stop. And all of a sudden, I, or what I think is I, is back in that room. Only I'm up in a corner of the room. I'm levitating somehow, and I can look down and see my body still in a chair with my eyes closed, and I can see the woman who's leading this session leaning toward me, looking at me intently, and everyone else is looking at me. And I decide that I want to go outside, so I walk through the walls of the house outside into Rockville, Maryland, spend a few moments out there. Then I hear a loud clapping, and I bounce back down on my seat, and I shake my head. And the woman asks me if I'm okay. I say, I don't know. But something had happened. Something had happened. Now, of course, I could have been hypnotized, but we hadn't ingested any drugs, or I hadn't taken any drink. So hypnotism, that was it. So I came away, and the next week the same thing happens. But the next time, she lets me stay out there for so long that I start wandering toward a light. She says I would see a light, and she's right. There's a light out there, bright light. And I walk toward it, and all of a sudden I get a sense of being with other beings. They don't have bodies, but they're there, and they're greeting me. That's about as far as I get that second time. But I keep going further and further and further into this. And they begin teaching me things. They begin teaching me things about, about the way the world works, to put it bluntly. And what I learned was not through any words passing, but it was the kind of stuff that mystics have learned for thousands of years. That there's a certain oneness to all things, for example, or that Earth is a school, that you're born and reborn, constantly like Groundhog Day, getting it better and better and better, and gradually diminishing the need to be reborn, working as a bodhisattva, helping other people. I sort of saw all this, and stuff I would never have seen with my Harvard-trained mind. Never, never, never. So I really start beginning to realize that some of this might be true. But if it isn't true, then the only other alternative is that I'm crazy. I've lost my mind. All these adventures have finally taken their toll, and that I've lost my friggin' mind. I'm going crazy. I need help. I'm mentally ill. So I start reading, going to occult bookstores. I take sick days off and go in the back of the occult bookstore, so nobody in the State Department or the White House staff who knows me would see me in an occult bookstore, because that would be the end of my job. And I start reading about this and finding out that what I'm experiencing is very similar to every out-of-body experience that has ever been described, whether it's the recent ones, people that Kubler-Ross describes, quote, dying on the operating table, or classic mystic saints like St. John of the Cross or St. Teresa or whatever. It's all the same thing, the white light, the sense of oneness, the Earth as a school, the lessons. It's all the same. So I feel a little bit less crazy, except that 5 days a week I'm planning nuclear war for NATO. That's what I'm doing at the time with my 5 days a week, flying back and forth to Brussels, planning nuclear war for NATO, how to turn Leningrad into glass. And on the weekends, I work with the Inner Peace Movement, and in a short amount of time, I'm giving these lectures myself. And I actually worked for 3 years as a paid psychic. I was doing healing people with my hands. I was leading seances. I was doing exorcisms. I was doing all this stuff. At the same time, I'm planning nuclear war for NATO 5 days a week. Now, you didn't think I would think I was going crazy. Then I really thought I was going crazy. I couldn't understand it. So finally, I'm at my wit's end. I understand there's something true going on, Craig. There's something true going on, because I'm not an idiot. I am experiencing these things, but how? What's going on? And the mystic books in the occult bookstore explain it intellectually, but so I asked for a sign. I said, look, I may be going crazy, and if I'm not going crazy, and I also began to realize that the question I asked in the McKinley River, is there a quid pro quo, is being answered. I haven't quite got the grasp of the answer yet, though. What is my life about? Is there something I need to do with it that I hadn't figured out? So, I asked for this sign. Our family's down at a farm we used to go to in Charlottesville with a couple other Foreign Service couples. And we have little kids, they have little kids, and the farm is owned by our friend's parents. He's a doctor, retired. And we're sitting on the porch of this wonderful farmhouse in Charlottesville and having a drink. And all of a sudden there's screams, and all the little kids, 4 or 5 of them, came running toward us. It turns out that a little 4-year-old boy has just put his hand on a red-hot tractor tailpipe. It just horribly burned it. And so the kids are all running up to us, screaming. The mother grabs the kid, and the doctor runs for to call the 911 and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, something came over me, and I asked the mother to give me this frightened child with his burned hand. I put that kid's hands between my hands, and I went back to that place of light and peace, the light at the end of the tunnel that I first saw that evening in Rockville. Take away my hands, and there's no sign of burning on the kid's hands. He's completely, it's like it never happened. And I just sat there, and everybody else would have sat there, and because this is pretty incredible stuff. But that was the sign. And that made me realize that I had to do something about it. So the power and the adventure didn't seem so important anymore. What was important was dealing with those ideals that I first began to think about when I noticed all the suffering and poverty that I was part of, in some cases even causing in the developing world, in the third world. So I applied to go up to the United Nations from Washington, D.C., and it was perfect because they put me in charge of all America's policies toward the entire developing world, because we didn't give a you-know-what about the developing world in those days. It's like, the only thing we cared about is whether you voted for us or for the Ruskies in the United Nations, the Russians in the Security Council. They didn't care about the rest of it. But then Jimmy Carter became president. You all remember, those of you who are old enough. He came up there with a human rights push, and all of a sudden, my dead-end job became one of the most important jobs at the United Nations, at the U.S. mission, because the whole third world became much more important. And I began to see that I could start to use the smarts and the toughness that I had used for so many years, wars and revolutions. I could use them in service. I could use them to make things better. And all of a sudden, I had this huge platform for doing that. So I got deeply involved in a lot of issues, in particular the ending apartheid in South Africa. And I will say, one thing I would feel really good about on my tombstone was that I had a direct role in helping end apartheid by creating and crafting the arms embargo against South Africa that finally took the guns out of the hands of the South African military and police they were using to kill blacks. That turned to be a really important thing, and I was responsible for it. I took enormous risks to do that. But it was also, ironically enough, a huge adventure. But anyway, by then I was absolutely hooked. There was nothing more important now than saving the world. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to save the world. I realized then, that Carter having been defeated, that I couldn't keep doing stuff like this with Ronald Reagan. I couldn't do it working for anybody else. This was so crazy. The stuff I was doing was so crazy that I couldn't expect to be doing this under any kind of a system. So I quit the Foreign Service, and I thought then that I would just give wonderful speeches and I would write wonderful books, and that would save the world. Well, that's what I thought. And then I panicked because I didn't have any money. I mean, I left the Foreign Service, and I had a small bit of retirement pay, which they gave back to me in a lump sum, but it was going to disappear in a couple of years. So I panicked. I forgot all these wonderful ideals and stuff, all these new intentions, changing the world, and all just disappeared because I would just panic over money. So I said, okay, I'll set up a consulting business. And here I'm not going to retell the story because this is a story I've already told, but some of you know it, that I set up a consulting business that failed miserably. I spent every last dime hiring a secretary on Wall Street and whatever. I was going to advise banks on how to invest in the third world because I knew foreign ministers. I was plugged in all over the planet. I could do this. Well, I didn't get a single damn client. And so then I was really desperate. And it turned out a job appeared that I could lecture on cruise ships. Long story short, I had taken my daughter on this cruise ship for which I'm being paid an outlandish amount of money for a couple of speeches. I didn't care what I talked about. I was a member of the ship's entertainment staff, and half the job was dancing with widows. And I was well aware of the irony of what I was doing. I mean, I was earning money, but I was saving the world one blue-haired widow at a time. I was like, anyway, the ship catches fire.
Of course it does.
And it's going to sink, but it catches fire. And not only that, this is October in the Gulf of Alaska. And they catches fire in an evening, and at that meal that evening, they distribute Dramamine because a typhoon is bearing down on us. So by the time the ship is sinking, the burning ship is sinking, the typhoon Vernon envelops us. So by the time they lower the lifeboats, these lifeboats are lowered, and helicopter. We're 140 miles from shore. Helicopters start rescuing people. Again, long story short. After about 12 hours, I see my daughter rescued and she's taken off. And so 550 people after a while, there's only a few of us left in lifeboat number 2. And it's about 5:30 in the evening. The typhoon hit us full. We're going up and down in 30-foot seas. Those of you who are boat people know what it's like in 30-foot seas. You go up 30 feet, then down 30 feet, 60 feet, up and down, up and down, up and down. We're all deathly seasick. We have no cover against the cold. We're dying of hypothermia. And the winds are getting worse. And the key thing is the light. Because there's a bit of light left, even in the storm. You could see, I don't know, 100 yards maybe. But once it got dark up there, and it was October, once it got dark up there, we were dead. We had maybe 5 or 6 hours before hypothermia killed us. So we had to be rescued rather quickly, and we would never survive the night. But it got to be 4:35, light began to ebb, our chances began to diminish to close to zero. And at that point, I just had it. I just had absolutely had it. And all the tension and all the stuff from all these weird parts of my life just welled up in me, and I said, I don't get it. Yes, I had this early life and all the wars and revolutions, but I've changed. I've helped end apartheid. I've devoted myself to doing your work, whatever you are. You know, I'm here to make a difference in the world, and now I'm being wiped out, and that's the stupidest thing I ever heard of. I went to a Jesuit high school. The Jesuits taught me about order in the universe, you know, the crystal structure and the way things are all nicely ordered in the universe, and there's no order in this, because just as I finally figure it out, it took me 36 years, but I'm finally figuring it out, you're killing me. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. And I don't know what the other couple guys in the lifeboat heard, but what I heard looks like it was broadcast from boom boxes on all sides of me. This booming voice came out of the storm, and it basically said, stop kidding yourself. You get out of this one alive, you're going to keep lecturing on cruise ships because you haven't got the guts to exercise the ideals you know you've got. You haven't got the guts to do it. So you got to make a decision. You got to find that courage to do it and live the life that you now know you're supposed to be living. The quid pro quo from the McKinley River, a life of service. That's why you've been saved. Well, you have to keep your part of the bargain. What'll it be? That's how stark it was. What'll it be? And I remember looking up into the storm and just saying, okay, okay. And at that instant, this Coast Guard cutter comes out of this wild storm, and that would have cut us in two with a lookout not seeing us. So I'm here. And you know, I never looked back after that. That was in 1980. A few years later, I met Ann, the Giraffe Project. Rest is history, as they say. So now let's get down to the everyday mystic. I'm well aware when I tell these stories, certainly when I tell them rapidly, like tonight, they're so bizarre that the whole idea that that they have some relevance to anybody else is kind of strange. But I think they do. I think all of us have purposes in our lives that we all look for meaning. And for me, I got a hint of that question even existed, lying on the gravel bar at the McKinley River, and then finally, in that lifeboat, understanding that I had finally found what was meaningful in my life. I had to do it. I think the reason all this stuff happened to me was that I was so stubborn. I mean, I was totally intellectual, highly trained, highly educated, and the whole idea of turning off my mind, going with my heart, opening myself up to those other realms was so strange that it never, never, never would have happened had I not had these series of mystical experiences. And sure enough, once I'd made that decision, the guidance I got was to back off all that external or mystical stuff that I was doing. And I did. I mean, the message to me was, okay, you finally got it. Now you're on your own. Now you have to put this knowledge to work, actually putting it to work by doing tough things in the world, making life better for other people. Remember those ideals? That's it. The ones that you finally agreed to in that lifeboat. And so I think that I tell the story, but I always quickly say that it was the bizarreness of my story is because I was so stubborn. For other people, it can be much easier. And I do think that in terms of an avenue into those other worlds, call it mysticism, call it transcendental, whatever you like, is available for all of us. But it does mean, at least temporarily, suspending your disbelief. That's hard, especially for those of us, all of us, I guess, who are pretty highly educated. And there are a lot of ways, some things to think about. I wrote a few of them down, but one of them is dreams, our dream state. People have known for a long time that the dream state is an important avenue into the other worlds. Happens all the time. The avenues are out there all the time. And Anna's given me permission to tell a story that's very fresh. She had a dream last night. She told me about breakfast of a friend, and that she was at his bedside and he was dying. And she found out this morning that's exactly what had happened. He had died during the night. And things like that happen. And the proverbial phone call, I don't think I would doubt it, or maybe I shouldn't put words in your mouth, but I mean, everybody has the experience that the phone rings and you know it's Aunt Martha, and damned if it isn't Aunt Martha, or something like that. One of my favorite tests is I call the red light test. You're driving down the highway and you hit a red light. Or in our case, you're driving down in Mukilteo and you just missed the ferry. Most of us, you get a little impatient, maybe a little angry, whatever. And I urge you to try this. But when that happens, you've just missed the ferry or you get stopped at a red light, just take a couple of deep breaths and ask yourself why you missed the green, why you missed the ferry. Just for the moment, entertain. There was a reason why you missed the green, missed the ferry, why you missed the green. Look around yourself. Maybe there's a billboard that you would have flashed by without looking at it, or maybe there's someone walking down the street in a peculiar way that you would never have focused on had you been able to keep moving. I don't know, it could be anything. It could be nothing. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. But I mean, I find this a really good test, or whether it's the 3 minutes at a red light or the 20 minutes at a ferry landing, just for the moment entertaining the idea that maybe there's a reason why you missed the green. There is something you should see in terms of meaning in your own life. Something you need to do, something you need to think about. Another thing is reading auras. Not that big a deal. Just practice. Obviously, don't do it at an important cocktail party where people might think you're. Well, I don't know what they'll think. But you look at people's heads and let your eyes go out of focus, and see if you don't see different shapes and different colors. I'm not for a moment suggesting what to interpret what those shapes or colors are, just that you notice that they're different, and then try to interpret yourself what that difference might be. Does an angry person screaming at you have a different aura than someone who's just been meditating, or a small child, or whatever? Obviously, Aboriginal peoples have a lot of insights into going into these other realms. I just did a sweat, example, a sweat lodge with some of my buddies here on South Whidbey. And if you do it right, the way the Native Americans do, it's a wonderful avenue to trance states. People ask me about chemical assistance. All I can tell you is that all these things, especially the 3 years when I was an active practicing psychic, I never used LSD or peyote or anything like that, because I found out that I could get where they took you and beyond without use of drugs. On the other hand, there's a reason they call whiskey spirits. So, I could go either way with that one. Anyway, I think I'm going to stop here, or not stop, but as you pointed out, pause. And by the way, the questions and comments tonight, please, they can't be oral, or they can't be written. I want you to sense your questions, and then I will sense back the answers. Just kidding, just kidding.
I was really looking forward to that.
All right, I'm going to stop.
Wow. Okay. You're an amazing storyteller, but you know that. You do know that.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second. Not that you interrupted me. Oh, God. I blew it. See, I used to be a diplomat, saying all the right things at the right time. I've lost that knack completely. Yeah. Well, anyway, what did I just say?
What were you going to interrupt? I don't know. Anybody?
You're a great storyteller.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say is that the telling the stories are here to a group of people that many of you, my friends, or giving a talk to a bunch of people in a hotel ballroom. I see it all now as part of answering that question on the McKinley River. That yes, of course, I have an absurd amount of good stories, many of which are in that book. But I don't tell them I certainly don't tell them for the applause. I don't tell them to entertain. In fact, I resist anyone suggesting that I'm an entertainer or a, quote, motivational speaker. I don't like that. I do it because they have a purpose. And if even one person in an audience is struck or has an insight, then I've succeeded.
Well, it's story at its highest calling. Okay, so what I'm curious about here, you get to the point that you change the course of your life to be in service. Can you speak a little bit about what that looks like? How is your life of service, for those that don't know, and to the pieces that I don't know? How is it that you feel in alignment with your life now, with your life's purpose, that wasn't then? In what way?
Well, first thing is, I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Here's a guy. I got really good at taking a risk. I mean, if you're in a tough spot, you're in a foxhole, you really want me in that foxhole with you. That's the kind of person I am. So what I do now with the Giraffe Project, I mean, I was in Egypt just last June, setting up a giraffe operation, training political activists. I got out of the country less than 48 hours before the Egyptian government passed a law where I would be in jail today as a, quote, what do they call it, teacher of democracy or whatever they're calling it now in Egypt. I went to Zimbabwe, was chased around the country by Mugabe's secret police for 10 days. I was meeting with all kinds of activists and training them in terms of what to do, in terms of preparing for the next elections. I was in Tibet the year before that, writing exposés of the genocide going on and stuffing the notes into my socks so I could get out of the country when I was strip searched. And all this is the kind of stuff that used to excite me when I was 20 years old. You know, it was adventure. So I'm good at that. So I'm using that, but doing it in this, I think, much larger purpose. I'm trying to use every bit of me so that I can use certainly I use as an overall backdrop the insights I gain from out-of-body experiences about how the world works, because it really helps calm me down. I mean, I really do. I think I have a good. Let me put it this way, because I don't want to proselytize. I have an understanding that really works for me as to how the universe works, and it motivates me and answers a lot of key questions. I don't have a lot of confusion about strategy in my life. I worry about tactics. I don't worry about strategy. So that part was important. My past, my life as a diplomat and an adventurer is important because I'm still pretty good at all that stuff. So I put it all together. I want to, I forget. I don't know. W.C. Fields, somebody said, what they want on their tombstone is, here he lies, marvelously used up. I think that's great. I would love that on my tombstone. Here he lies, marvelously used up. Every part of me gets used up, you know? Yeah.
For those people that haven't had that kind of direct experience, it's more of, so the mystical is it's something out there. It's something they're aligned with, they believe in, but they haven't had the direct contact experience that you have. What would you offer them, because that knowingness altered your life, at least eventually?
Yeah.
Speaking with young people, especially, that maybe aspire to that, what is it that you offer them to counteract the lack of direct experience, to still follow the original? How do you mold that? Or do you not really, because they have to experience it and eventually get there themselves anyway?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think that it has to be direct experience, because you just, like me, there was no way that I intellectually could have come to any of this knowledge. No way. In fact, the more educated I became, the more resistant I became. Prove it, prove it, prove it. You can't prove that. You can't prove that. Are you out of your mind? And it has to be direct experience, but it doesn't have to be healing a boy's hand. It's like the red light test, or the missing the ferry test, or just picking a dark night and going out for a walk as far away from any lights on South Whidbey as you can get. Your first impulse is fear, because we've all been acculturated to be afraid of the dark. But let the fear pass and just sense what's out there. Because the spirit world moves a lot at night, and you might sense something. But it has to be a direct experience. And for young people, it's hard. Maybe, I don't know, these days. I mean, with you can't tweet it. I don't think. But on the other hand, I'm an old fogey, so I don't know. But the main answer is it has to be some kind of direct experience, through meditation, through sweat lodges, through the red light test, through I don't know. I suggested a few ways, but they all involve suspending disbelief. That's where you have to start. You don't have to make a, quote, fool of yourself. Just quietly suspend your disbelief and try something like walking at night without a light, or doing the red light, miss the ferry test, or spending a bit more time with your dream. I mean, not all dreams are the result of the movie you just saw, or like Scrooge says, a bit of bad beef. There are messages out there. Not every dream. I mean, again, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. But the reason the Aboriginal peoples have spent so much time interpreting in dream interpretation is because they're not dumb. They know that the other world speaks to us through the dream state a lot.
Do you? What happens when you reach a point in your life that you can't be the physical adventurer that you've always been, and the adventure becomes a subtler or less physical? Let's put it that way. Do you think about that?
Oh man, that's
like your worst nightmare?
No, it hurts because it's true. It's true. I mean, I'm still climbing mountains, but summer before last, I was on a really difficult, and it turned out way more dangerous trip than we had imagined with some of my buddies deep in the Olympics. It was really tough. And halfway through, I had to ask a couple of the younger members to take half the weight out of my pack. It's very embarrassing, but these guys are all my friends, so of course you got all the good-natured teasing and stuff, but still I was really worried, and I was questioned what was going on. To my utter amazement, I found out that I have a form of emphysema. I'll never climb a big mountain again. And so your question, I thought, how did he know that, you son of a gun? That's been really hard for me. It's been really hard for me. I look out at those mountains. I look out from Langley. I've climbed all those peaks at one time or the other. On the Olympics, I've climbed most of them as well. And of course, I've climbed some of the biggest peaks in the world. But I'm never going to do that again. Even bucking up logs with my little chainsaw gets to be harder and harder work. So a lot of it is forcing me to do exactly what you suggested. I'm going to be spending more time with my blog, more time writing. And less time climbing mountains. But at the same time, I just did get back from Zimbabwe not a month and a half ago. It doesn't take a lot of energy to stay a couple feet ahead of Mugabe's secret police. I kept taking mammy buses, country buses, because I figured that the security services would never think a white man would take a dirty local bus, so they would be looking at the ones the corporate types took, the mine owners and stuff, and so that foxed them pretty good. But I can do that, and the stuff that I've been doing in Egypt or Tibet, I can do that. But I have to find my way, and it's like it's kind of like the thing. Like I said before, what sustains me, you didn't use that word, but what sustains me is the fact that my strategic sense is clear. So this current thing with the emphysema is tactical. I have to figure out a way of adjusting physically what I do, different tactics, same strategy. Now, that's a whole lot different if you're 71 and struggling to find a strategy, a life purpose. I'm there. I've been there for a long time. My life purpose is very clear. So while it's tough, and Ann has to deal with all my complaints, I'll come out of it. I'll be okay.
All right, thank you. I think that's a good place to open it up, so I don't be so selfish with the questions. And if there are any other statements or questions from the audience there, and if not, I'll continue. But I just want to open it. Yes.
So I have a question. That moment right after you held the little boy's hand on the porch. That was the time that your medicine became public.
Yeah.
You really came into the world. And I'm assuming with people that maybe you had not shared that before.
Right.
So that was a bridge of some kind for you from that spirit world into that place. And I'm wondering about your friends who were on the porch. When that became real,
right.
What happened?
Well, I didn't tell the whole story. Yeah, they wanted to know what the hell had happened, what I had done. And I began to try to explain to them